What's going on, guys? I'm so excited to be able to chat with you a little bit, to share a little story of the gospel with you tonight. And this story of the gospel might be a familiar story, but what I think it highlights is a key aspect of not only Jesus' character, but also the character of what he calls us to be today. See, we're going to be in Luke 10, and we're going to jump right in to verse 25. It says here, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He replied. How do you read it? And he answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? You see, in our text, we see an expert in the law asking a question that I think, if we're honest, is a question that we can often ask ourselves. What do I need to do, Jesus? Jesus, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? What do I need to do to get full and abundant life? What do I need to do to get life and life to the full? I think if we're honest, whether we are faithful, whether we are Christian or not, that is a question that all people ask themselves from time to time. And I just love the way that Jesus engages with him and kind of flips the question back onto him, because it helps just show Jesus where this dude is at, show him what he thinks, and it kind of gauges his own teaching opportunity. You see, Jesus asks him, what does the law say? How do you interpret it? And this expert answers beautifully. He points to the Shema, this common phrase, this common way of being for the Jews. This text that says, you must love the Lord your God with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your might. This is a very common answer, but he also does this extra little flavor of adding in not only this vertical love, but also this love for neighbor, this outward love. He nails it. And Jesus says so. But then he kind of adds on an asterisk of who exactly is my neighbor? And I think he does this just because this is a big ask. See, even the word neighbor in the ancient context had this force of mutual reliance, of saying that this other person I will be responsible for and they will be responsible for me, that we are going to do life together. So this expert in the law is like, well, surely that can't be everyone. Surely that is for a specific set of people. Surely that is only for those that I am close to. And I think if we're honest, we can kind of catch ourselves doing likewise with Jesus' commands. Well, surely he can't mean that for everything. It can't mean that for everyone. And let's just see how Jesus responds here. It says in verse 30 that in reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So to a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he too passed on the other side. See, Jesus responds with a parable, this story that's meant to teach a lesson, and he introduces this crisis. A man that is beaten, robbed, and left half dead on the side of the road. And he introduces these two characters that we would assume to be the heroes in Jesus' tale. We see a priest and a Levite. Now, both of these people were considered people that were leaders of Jesus' day and that were kind of born into leadership roles. They were the ones that the Jews would look to teach them the ways of God, to teach them the right ways of living. But when given the opportunity to act, they choose not to. You see, I think that when they see this person that's beaten on the other side of the road, I don't think it's necessarily ritual purity that they're thinking. I think if we're honest, they are thinking what a lot of us would be thinking. That if this person was robbed and stripped and left half dead, that this probably ain't a good part of town. That this could likely happen to me as well. And they do what I think a lot of us would do in this situation of trying to self-preserve, trying to do what's best for them, trying to make sure that they are going to be okay. See, I think something that we can struggle with, something that I struggle with, is so often when we ask the question, how do I get full and abundant life? We know the right answers, but in our hearts and in our lives, we can say like, well, also, I think if I just have enough money, if I have enough power, if I have enough security, if I'm able to have enough comfort or time or whatever it is, if I can just have enough, I'll be able to have full and abundant life. And then I can start pushing that outwards. Man, as I think about this struggle in my own life, I just think of how exhausting it is to try and have everything in life figured out, to have it all on my shoulders. Man, it is such an exhausting task, this hope of self-preservation. But lucky for you and lucky for me, Jesus invites us to a different way of being. And he does so through an unlikely character. It says here, as our text continues in verse 33, that a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and then put the man on his own donkey, and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these 3 men do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert of the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." And Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." See, I love that Jesus chooses to use a Samaritan for his example. See, Samaritans in Jesus' day were the enemy. They were the most ethnically and religious other that there could ever be. If there's someone that we would assume would definitely not be a neighbor, not be someone to care for, not be someone to do a radical act of love for a Jew, it would be a Samaritan. And so this text invites us to see this aid coming from an unlikely source, especially after we just saw a priest and a Levite pass up on this opportunity. Instead, it comes through a Samaritan. But what the difference between the priest and the Levite and the Samaritan is that the Samaritan is so outwardly focused. See, the danger that stayed away the priest and the Levite is still there. But the Samaritan sees the man in trouble and is moved with compassion. He's moved to pity. He's moved to grow close and to act in radical love. You see, I think this is the invitation for you and for me today. That as we see someone in pain, as we're invited to let go of this idea of self-preservation, of trying to make life and life abundant for ourselves, and instead walk towards a radical state of living outwardly focused. You see, I think that we can actually look at the Samaritan to see 4 movements that this text invites us into. You see, the Samaritan sees, cares, moves, and acts. He sees the person. He sees someone in need. And I think often this can be the hardest thing for us to do in our lives. But this week, I invite you to critically inquire, to really consider those in your context that might be in pain, that might be suffering, that might be in hard spots. Likely you will not come across a man that's half dead lying in the streets, but there will be ample suffering and pain and hardship that we can move in close to. The next movement is this word care. You see, in verse 33, this word pity can also could be translated into moved with compassion. And I love this because the Greek root for this is this word gut. This idea of being moved from our inner being outward. That there's something in us that when we see those suffering, when we see clearly people in pain, that our hearts break. And from that breaking heart, we will naturally do our third movement, which is move. We will move in close. I want you to consider a moment that you were in pain, when you were suffering, when you could empathize with the man that was half dead. Consider what you wanted most. If you're like me, all you wanted was someone to move in close, and that's what we're invited to do. And to finally act. Not just to give fancy words or fleeting prayers, but instead to move in close and act in love. See, this is the invitation for you and for me, that we can take this lesson, that we can take this idea of letting go of self-preservation and instead be radically concerned with the care for others. And if we do this, we are promised full and abundant life.